My name is Father John Hibbert. I'm the pastor of Queen of the Most Holy Rosary Parish here in Belleville, Ontario. With the inability of Christians to gather together for worship as they usually do on the Lord's Day, that is on Sunday, I thought I would present a number of presentations that might help us to understand a little bit of the significance of Sunday. They say that absence makes the heart grow fonder, and we do not appreciate something until it's taken away. We say this about Sunday and the Eucharist. For this reason, I thought these thoughts might help us to appreciate in a greater way the significance of Sunday, and especially of the Sunday Eucharist. In all the Gospel accounts, we are told that the resurrection of Jesus took place on the first day of the week, and the disciples from the beginning gathered on that day, studied the Scriptures, and celebrated the Eucharist. Therefore, in order to understand the significance of this day for us as Christians, we have to begin with creation and with the book of Genesis. Now, not too many people know how to read the book of Genesis and the account of creation. Some take it as scientific account, others dismiss it as fanciful because it doesn't coordinate with science. Always we seem to be in this opposition of religion and of science, and that's not the case. The book of Genesis is a book of divinely revealed truth, but it never was intended to be a scientific account giving us scientific facts. But it does contain truth, eternal truth, but a different type of truth than historical truth or scientific truth. It's a truth about the mystery and the meaning of our life, our own life and God's life, and especially of God's action in the world. And so in addition to the physical universe around us, there is a spiritual world of which we are part. The book of Genesis is telling us about these spiritual realities that affect our life. And so the author's aim was not a scientific telling of creation, rather a story about God as the first principle of life. First of all, we have to note that there are two versions of creation. One in the first chapter of Genesis that spills over into chapter 2, and then there is a second account in chapter 2. Each of them has a complementary theme and a very central theme, each approaching from a very different perspective. But both of them invite us to see the loving hand of the one eternal God in a world that is inhabited by free and sinful human beings. God is the beginning of all beginnings. It's a story that's told in imagery, or in a poetic fashion, or we might say it is a metaphor, because that's the only way to talk about the mysteries of life, such as love and the meaning and purpose of life. In other words, it's really a love story as opposed to an historical or scientific account. We have to remember that as human beings we live in two worlds. There is the physical universe all around us, the universe that we see, the universe that we experience, the universe in some way that lends itself to proving things. But there's also an interior world in which we live, and that is what we might call the world of the heart. It's where we find the meaning of life. We all know what love is, we experience it, but try to sit down and put it into words and it's very difficult. And that is why we tend to relate stories about love in order to help us to understand its meaning. Well, that's really what the book of Genesis is doing. And so the author uses everyday images, mainly presenting God as a worker, like any of his listeners or readers of his time. The account in Genesis chapter 1 is the one we're most familiar with. It is creation in 7 days. If you're going to explain something unknown or mysterious, you start with something that's known to people. The 7-day cycle of the week was an important part of Jewish life and experience, and so it became the framework for telling the story about creation. Now, these spring days, think how the day unfolds for you. At twilight, the birds begin to sing and the animals stir, even before we do. First, the sky begins to lighten and we begin to see the form of the earth. This is the picture of creation in the book of Genesis. It uses what is a familiar everyday experience to announce and to explain the action of God. And so at the bidding of the Almighty, the world dawns first as a day, first with twilight, then the appearance of the landscape, the waking of the birds and beasts to life, and finally the human being goes to work. So we can think of God as an artisan at his workbench. First, he kindles the fire of his light even before daybreak begins. He arranges all his tools and all his materials, and then he sets to work, forming wonderful creatures. He completes his task by a final work of art, a human being in his own image. Then he rests at the end of the week to marvel at what he has created. And so we can think of God as a laborer. At the beginning of the week, as a wise workman, he devises a plan, spreads his tasks over several days. He finishes his work in 6 days and then rests on the 7th day. And on that 7th day, he enjoys what he has created and what he has fashioned. In chapter 2 of Genesis, we can imagine God as a potter. He forms a clay jug in the image of himself, and then he blows his life-giving breath, that is his spirit, into the opening of the jug, and it comes alive. So human history begins. The account unfolds as does the rhythm of our life. We start life as an innocent, carefree, naked baby coming into this world through birth. It begins with the happiness of childhood, but soon the human being, formed from the dust of the earth, begins to grow and learns how to say no as the child forms and exercises his or her own free will and desires. Finally, the adolescent grows to adulthood, marries and leaves his home to move away and start a new life. And then the story repeats itself. What is important for us to appreciate in order to understand the significance of Sunday is to focus on the first day of creation and on the 7th day, called the Sabbath. And so let us read from the beginning of the account of the first day and the last day, from chapter 1 of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while the Spirit of God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And then at the end, God saw everything that he had made. Indeed, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the 7th day, God finished the work he had done, and rested on the 7th day from all the work that he had done. We'll pick up this first and last day in our next talk, and hopefully you'll be able to join us for that.